Number of COVID-19 cases from the Minuangoda and Paliagoda clusters rose to 4,678. 130 individuals had recovered from the virus today, raising the total number of recoveries in the country to 3,933.
පවත්වාගෙන යනු ලබන ඇඳිරි නීතිය තවදුරටත් ඉදිරියේදී ඒ ප්‍රදේශවල නිරෝධායන ඇඳිරි නීතිය
The restrictions imposed in areas that are under curfew will continue to be in effect. If there is a reduction in the number of COVID-19 cases from a certain area, we will take steps to lift the curfew in that locality. Based on the advice of the President, we reviewed the quarantine process in the country and updated him on the current situation. Accordingly, based on the advice of the President that was issued today, the immediate contacts of any individual infected with COVID-19 will be directed to undergo quarantine at their homes instead of being sent to quarantine centers. We expect them to undergo quarantine at their homes by following the proper process.
වෙන්නේ ඔවුන් ඒ ආකාරයෙන්ම නිවසට වී නිරෝධායන කටයුතු වල යෙදෙයි කියලා.
Quarantine curfew is currently in effect in 64 police jurisdictions across the island. Newsfirst inquired about the problems faced by those living in these areas.
Transport services during quarantine curfew. State Minister Dilum Amunugama, speaking to Newsfirst, said all buses which commence operations from Fort and Petta and list Fort and Petta as destination will no longer operate until further notice. The State Minister said this applies to both Sri Lanka Transport Board and private bus operators. The Department of Examinations said the suspended transport services will not affect students facing the GCE advanced level examination. Several public hotspots, including the Gunasinghapura bus depot in Colombo and the Manning Market, was disinfected today.
නොවැම්බර් මාස 2 වෙනිදා දක්වා අපි සැලසුම් කරලා තියෙනවා කොටුව ප්‍රදේශය මර්දාන ප්‍රදේශ සහ
We have decided to disinfect all public hotspots in Colombo, including Fort and Maradana, until the 2nd of November. We urge the general public to support us by staying at home.
සහාය ලබා දීම තමයි මේ වෙලාවේ කළ යුතු වන්නේ.
Are train services in operation? The Department of Railways said long-distance and intercity train operations were cancelled with effect from today. All office and passenger transport train services operating along the main line, Puttalam line and Kalani Valley line were suspended. However, 6 train journeys would operate along the coastal line while the train would restrict its operations to Kolpiti. Public activities amidst curfew. Quarantine curfew has been imposed in 15 police jurisdictions in Colombo, 37 police jurisdictions in Gampaha, 5 police jurisdictions in Kuliapitiya, 3 in the Kaluthura district, 3 in Bellampitiya, and the Gottatua, Mulleriyawa and Balikada police jurisdictions. State and private banks in the Gampaha district were open today for the convenience of the general public. Our correspondent said supermarkets were also opened today. DIG Ajit Rohana said 152 individuals have been arrested for violating curfew regulations during the past 24 hours. He added that special police teams have been deployed to monitor the crowds opposite supermarkets in areas where curfew is in effect.
නිරෝධායන රීතිවලට පටහැනිව කටයුතු කරමින් ජනතාව එක්රැස්
We observed many instances in which the public violated quarantine regulations and failed to maintain social distancing. We have arrested about 20 individuals who had violated quarantine regulations. During the last 8 hours, we also seized about 9 vehicles that had violated quarantine curfew. We will also take legal action against them.
එම වාහනත් ඉදිරියේදී අධිකාරියට ඉදිරිපත් කිරීමට බලාපොරොත්තු.
Fishermen visited the Beruwala fisheries harbour to retrieve up to 500,000 kilograms of fish that have been stored in fishing trawlers in line with the directive issued by State Fisheries Minister Kanchana Wijesekara. However, the Public Health Inspector of Beruwala said only fishermen who test negative for COVID-19 will be allowed to enter the fisheries harbour that has remained closed due to COVID-19 fears.
It is only after receiving the PCR test result that we can make a decision about the others. We have decided to refrain from allowing anyone who has not undergone a PCR test to enter the harbour. Therefore, we have requested them to temporarily avoid entering the premises.
However, fishermen point out that it is only the staff and drivers attached to the Beruwala fisheries harbour who have not tested positive for the virus. Accordingly, they rejected the decision announced by the Public Health Inspector, citing that they are yet to receive the results of the PCR tests that were carried out 5 days ago. The police then intervened and dispersed the crowd.
අසුවේ මාළු බාන්න පුළුවන් ඒකට කැමති පුද්ගලයෙක් ඒ අය යොදාගෙන බා ගන්නවා ඇරින්න එතන කවුරුවත් නැහැ ආයිති හරි එහෙනම් ඔය 800 රිසාල්සනකම් බලන්න.
Fishermen in the Ambalangoda fishing harbour too faced many difficulties due to the current situation.
There's nothing we can do. These people are suffering from not being able to sell the fish. They are helpless. They don't have the money for their daily expenses. There is no way to sell the stock. The market price stands at 80 rupees. It costs more than 500,000 rupees for a boat to set sail. We have to pay salaries to our employees. If we don't, they will not be able to spend on their families. They are not allowing to fish in Negombo. Shops are not buying the fish. They keep telling us that they will seal it. I don't know what to do.
All fish shops in Negombo were closed today. However, local fishermen carried out their trade near the Negombo lagoon. Our correspondent said that the police had intervened to disperse those who attempted to purchase fish. The vehicular movement near the Kotalavala bridge in Negombo was hampered.
What is the situation at the Lady Ridgeway Hospital? 10 individuals at the Lady Ridgeway Hospital for Children have tested positive for COVID-19. The director of the hospital, Dr. G. Vijay Surya, said this included 7 children and 3 mothers.
The infected individuals are residents of areas near Colombo. They had contracted the virus by coming into contact with infected cases linked to the Palagoda fish market cluster. There is no threat to the staff at the hospital since we identified that these individuals had been infected upon admission to the hospital. Children ranging from 15 days to 12 years old are among the infected cases. They had contracted the virus from their parents. Incidents of this nature will not happen if we approach the children while adhering to health directives.
සෞඛ්‍ය ආරක්ෂක ක්‍රම අනුගමනය කළ දරුවා අල්ලනවා නම් ස්පර්ශ කරනවා නම් මෙවැනි අපරාධයක් මේ දරුවන්ට සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ නැහැ.
What is the situation at the parliamentary complex? The parliamentary complex was closed for 2 days starting from today after an intelligence officer attached to the premises had tested positive for COVID-19. Accordingly, the parliamentary complex will be disinfected today and tomorrow. The Parliament's Chief of Staff and Deputy Secretary General Neil Idhavela said activities would resume on Wednesday and that only the employees notified by their desk heads to report to work should do so. The situation in Kuliapitia.
58 patients have been identified from Kuliapitia. Since the recently infected cases were restricted to their homes, there is a low risk of them transmitting the virus to other individuals.
COVID-19 patients linked to the Palagoda cluster identified in several areas. A vendor in Bakamuna Polonnarua who had visited the Palagoda fish market to purchase prawns had tested positive for the virus. Accordingly, the Bakamuna town was disinfected today. 2 COVID-19 cases were detected from Hambantota as well. One of them is a close contact of a patient linked to the Palagoda cluster. Our correspondent reported that the Hambantota Fisheries Harbour and the Hambantota Fish Market were closed down due to this reason. The Kotagala town in Hatton was disinfected today after 2 COVID-19 cases were identified in the area. Both patients are close contacts of the Palagoda COVID-19 cluster. Several stores in the Ambapola town were closed down today after 2 people who visited the Palagoda fish market had tested positive for the virus. 2 fishmongers from Galevela in Marthale had also tested positive for COVID-19. They are considered to be linked to the Palagoda cluster. Meanwhile, an individual who had undergone a PCR test at the Palagoda fish market had left for Anuradhapura on a bus before receiving the results. He was hospitalized after his tests turned out positive. Officials said the patient had travelled up to the Pothanegama area in Anuradhapura on a bus plying from Colombo to Vaunia. PCR tests carried out in Vallampitiya revealed that 25 people had been infected by COVID-19. They were immediately directed to quarantine today. Several villages in Kegol, including Thalduwa and Upper Thalduwa, were isolated after 9 people who visited these areas had been infected by the virus.
COVID-19 PCR test positive.
Simply because a person tests positive for COVID-19, we do not admit them to hospital and give them special treatment. We will provide them with basic treatment until they test negative for the virus. Therefore, hospitalizing a patient is not essential. We have identified several other facilities that are not hospitals. Since the number of patients is increasing, I feel we will have to use those facilities. If a person tests positive for COVID-19, we consider them as an infected person and not a patient.
Infected person la හැටියටයි සලකන්නේ. ආසාදිත පුද්ගලයන් පමණයි රෝගීන් හැටියට සැලකීමක් කෙරෙන්නේ නැහැ.
සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශයේ විසින් මේ වන විට විශාල සංඛ්‍යාවක් රෝගීන් හඳුනාගෙන තියෙනවා.
The Health Ministry has identified several COVID-19 patients. More than 4,000 patients are receiving treatment at hospital currently. We have observed that this virus is capable of causing several complications and that it is more likely to claim a person's life. The elderly and the sick are highly vulnerable to the disease.
වැඩිහිටියන්ට රෝගීන්ට තවත් රෝගයකින් පෙළෙන කෙනෙකුට වැළඳුනහොත් තත්ත්වය ඉතාමත්ම බරපතලයි, ඉතාම භයානකයි.
බරපතල අවදානමක් රට තුළ නිර්මාණය වෙමින් පවතිනවා.
A dangerous situation is developing in the country. It would be apt to say that Sri Lanka is on the verge of entering the community transmission stage. COVID-19 deaths have been reported on 3 consecutive days, including the 16th death recorded last evening. The situation would go out of control if the virus starts spreading among the community. We will experience an extremely dangerous situation if the steps that we have already taken to curb the spread of the virus are implemented in future as well. A few days ago, it was said that a decision would be made concerning the districts that are in danger. However, we have not witnessed a positive response from the authorities so far. The country will face dire consequences if the relevant officials don't make timely decisions. I feel that technical matters must be taken into consideration even further. Although correct decisions are made, the manner in which they have announced them to the country have issued wrong signals to the people. Yesterday, it was announced that the curfew imposed in the Berula and Kaluta areas would be lifted by 5 a.m. today. We were wondering how such a decision could be made. We saw that a similar decision was taken over 2 villages that were isolated in Mannar. The president had intervened and rectified the situation afterwards. This situation cannot be managed by lifting curfews in a few days.
තාක්ෂණික කාරණා අනුව එහෙම දවස් 2-3කින් ඇදලා නීති ඉවත් කළා මේක කළමනාකරණය කරගන්න බෑ. මේ ව්‍යාප්තිය.
Meanwhile, a decision has been made to use Ayurveda medicine in the treatment of patients identified by COVID-19.
ආයුර්වේදයේ දීර්ඝ කාලයක් භාවිතා කරනු ලැබූ සුදර්ශන පැණිය නවීකරණය කර කොරෝනා රෝගයට යොදාගත හැකි ආකාරයට නිෂ්පාදනය කරලා තියෙනවා.
The Sudarsana suspension syrup that was used in Ayurveda treatment for a long time has been modified to be used in treating individuals infected by COVID-19. When we inquired into that matter, we found that the medicine has been manufactured in line with Western medicine standards. Therefore, we agreed to use the modified version of the Sudarsana suspension syrup at state hospitals. Together with the minister and the relevant officials, we also decided to admit COVID-19 infected cases to Ayurveda hospitals.
ඔවුන්ට ප්‍රතිකාර ලබා දීම සඳහා මූලික එකඟතාවකටත් අද ගරු අමාත්‍යතුමත් මමත් අපේ නිලධාරීනුත් එකඟතාවකට පැමිණියා.
Critical views were expressed over the country's health services and the mechanism to fight against COVID-19.
The manufacturing of PCR tube strips have been suspended. Although the MRI has manufactured them at a low cost, steps are being taken to import them at a higher cost. It is the MRI that issues the correct results of PCR tests when there are errors in reports prepared by private laboratories. However, the testings of samples by the MRI has dropped. Allowing private laboratories to analyze test samples has become a racket now.
Why has the post of Health Secretary been subjected to ridicule? The first thing that he did after assuming office was to transfer doctors by giving that priority. However, he did not do that to the doctors of a certain trade union. The next thing he did was to allow this trade union to gain economic advantage and the upper hand in other matters. He awarded the post of Director General of Health Services to an official who did not feel that he was fit for the position. The official in that position had realized that he is not the chosen ideal person for the post. It is such an individual who has been chosen by the Health Secretary to serve in that position in an acting capacity. Ultimately, the entire health ministry was subjected to ridicule due to this.
විහිළු සහගරයක් බවට පත්වෙච්ච සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශයක් බවට පත් වුණා. සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශ අධ්‍යක්ෂක ජෙනරල්තුමා
We request you to cancel the interview to choose the Director General of Health Services and instead appoint a suitable person to the position. If the President issues instructions to implement certain wrong decisions, we as the group that back the government to power have the right to change those decisions. If individuals are granted favoured appointments, then I wish to tell the President that the entire health sector, including doctors, will engage in strong trade union action.
වගකීමකින් යුක්ත මේ අවස්ථාවේ ප්‍රකාශ කරන්න මම කැමතියි.
පහුගිය වතාවේ ඉතා සක්‍රිය වැඩ කරපු සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශ හිටපු බොහෝ දෙනෙක් මේ මොහොතේ සෞඛ්‍ය අමාත්‍යාංශ දැන් නැහැ.
Many health ministry staffers who worked in the forefront of controlling this previous COVID-19 breakout in the country are no longer there. Dr. Anil Jasinghe and Dr. Paba Palihawadana are no longer a part of the health ministry. These individuals had some sort of power emanating from their personalities which helped them in carrying out their duties. An efficient figure such as Anil Jasinghe was transferred to another ministry as its secretary. Paba Palihawadana's request for service extension was turned down and she was sent home. To replace her, they appointed a group with no experience who the government could easily control. This is the group that the ministry is currently working with. This group is not sufficiently empowered to carry out their duties. This is why we are facing such a situation. The government established a COVID-19 fund. On what is the government spending this money on? These funds should be used to protect the general public from the pandemic, for social welfare, and the medical staffers who are facing a huge risk when treating corona-infected patients.
දෙවෙනි කාරණය මේ මොහොතේ කොරෝනා රෝගයට ගොදුරු වෙමින් තිබෙන සෞඛ්‍ය සේවය තුළ විශාල අන්තරකට ලක් වෙලා තියෙන සෞඛ්‍ය සේවකයන් නිවාය කළ යුතුයි.
ලෝකයේ තියෙන ප්‍රධාන මාදිලි දෙකක්. එක මාදිලියක් තමයි
There are two mechanisms adopted worldwide in the fight against COVID-19. One of them is to completely ban foreigners from entering the country so that the situation surrounding the virus can be brought under control while restoring economic stability. On the other hand, countries like the US gave prominence to the economy while identifying COVID-19 patients and then treating them before bringing the pandemic under control in their country. To which of these two approaches does our country's mechanism to combat COVID-19 belong to? For example, they have asked private and public sector employees to report to work even by using public transport. The bus stand in Peta has been closed. What is the work plan that has been rolled out by the government? They could have kept the country prepared when the number of infections had gone down. They did not take the appropriate steps that would suit the healthcare capacity of our country. What did they do? Rackets took place under the guise of controlling the virus and carrying out quarantine. They carried out a racket while offering packages to repatriate Sri Lankans by allowing corrupt companies to engage in these efforts. The law is not being enforced on entities that have power. The people have been badly affected. We urge the government to release a proper work plan basing epidemiologists. They will receive the required support if they do that.
උපාය මාර්ගයක් රටට ප්‍රකාශ කරන්න අපේ සහයෝගය ලැබෙනවා ඒ වෙනුවෙන් කටයුතු.
නෑ මේ වගේ තත්ත්වයක් යටතේ කාට හරි කියන්න පුළුවන් මේ
Given the prevailing situation in the country, anyone would suggest that the country must be placed under a lockdown. However, lockdown could cost the country and its economy a major deal. If we go for another lockdown and halt all economic activities in the country instead of moving forward, we will end up going backwards. The government is trying its best to control this situation without hindering public and economic activities. The government is trying its best to control this crisis without inconveniencing and creating unnecessary panic among the public while protecting the economy.
අපි රජයක් හැටියට මේ වෙලාවේ උත්සාහ කරන්නේ සිදු කරන්නේ.
Sri Lanka's geopolitics.
US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrived in New Delhi, India this afternoon, commencing the official visit to 4 countries in the Asian region. The US State Secretary is scheduled to arrive in Colombo tomorrow evening.
US Defense Secretary Mark Esper is accompanying the State Secretary in his visit. Mike Pompeo was welcomed at the New Delhi airport by US Ambassador in India, Kenneth Juster. The third US-India 2+2 ministerial dialogue will be held at 10 a.m. Indian time tomorrow. The group will then meet Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Meanwhile, US Defense Secretary Mark Esper was accorded a ceremonial welcome upon his arrival at the Defense Ministry in the Indian capital. He also held talks with his Indian counterpart Rajnath Singh in New Delhi to deepen defense ties. The US State Department said the holding of the third US-India 2+2 ministerial dialogue demonstrates the high-level commitment the two countries provide to shared diplomatic and security objectives.
This Sunday I'll depart for India, for Sri Lanka, for the Maldives, and then on to Indonesia. On every stop, I will discuss a broad range of bilateral topics, but also work to find out with each of those countries the best ways that we can make sure that we cooperate to preserve a free and open Indo-Pacific. I'm sure that my meetings will also include discussions on how free nations can work together to thwart threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party.
What do you expect to accomplish during this your visit to Indonesia? And the second is, what do you think about Indonesia's rejection to U.S. proposal to allow maritime surveillance planes to land and refuel there? And this proposal is look like similar with Pentagon report that China wants to have that base for military logistics in Indonesia. So is there any connection? Is that this U.S. proposal is trying to push China away from Indonesia?
Well, for the specifics, I'll defer to the Department of Defense about their conversations about particular military issues. Secretary Esper will be traveling with me to India, but not along with me to Indonesia. But I'm confident. He hosted the Indonesian Defense Minister. It was last week here in the United States. But it's no surprise that the United States firmly believes that it is in Southeast Asia, and that certainly includes the entire swath all the way down to Central Asia, that it's in their best interest to ensure that their sovereignty is protected against the continued efforts to increase.
There are clear indications that the visits are to strengthen U.S. allies in the region in preparation for a war against China, to win new allies, and also to neutralize them. Remember, the Secretary of State is not coming alone. He's accompanied by the Secretary for Defense, Mark Esper. The visit is to have bilateral discussions on multilateral matters. We should remember that the US duo began their global tour soon after Mike Pompeo formally announced America's new China policy, which no longer speaks of trade competition with China as a problem, or even bilateral issues on the ownership of overlapping territories in the South China Seas as a problem. No, the new China policy is about the very existence of China in its present form. In announcing this new policy, Pompeo also announced the creation of a new anti-China alliance in Asia, which would be military, diplomatic, and economic. The purpose of his visit to Sri Lanka is to push Sri Lanka to ally itself with the US against China, to strengthen those in government favorable to the US, and to weaken others or to neutralize them. I cannot imagine that the US Secretary of State will be taking the risk of visiting without some guarantee from the government. MCC may be signed on our side to get our hand on the beggarly sum offered, on America's side to get its hand on our territory, on our land, natural resources and wealth, and our economic activity.
නෑ එහෙම කිසිම දෙයක් නෑ. මේක සාමාන්‍ය දෙයක්. ඒ කියන්නේ රාජ්‍යතාන්ත්‍රික මට්ටමින් විවිධ රටවල නායකයන් විදේශ ඇමතිවරුන් අපේ රටට පැමිණෙනවා.
There is no such thing taking place. It is normal for foreign delegates, ministers or secretaries to visit other countries. A few days ago, a high-level Chinese delegation visited Sri Lanka. A few days before that, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa held a virtual discussion with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And now the US Secretary of State will be arriving in the country. There is nothing unusual in Sri Lanka engaging in cordial discussions with other countries. The State Secretary's visit does not target any special agreement. A discussion regarding such a matter has not been prepared either. This is a visit taking place as per normal traditions.
විශේෂ ගිවිසුමක් ඉලක්ක කරගෙන නෙවෙයි එතුමා එන්නේ ඒ පිළිබඳ සාකච්ඡාවක් සංවිධානය කරලා නැහැ. මේක සාමාන්‍ය සම්ප්‍රදාය අනුව සිදුවන දෙයක්.
මේ රටේ ජාතිකවාදී බලවේග කුලප්පු කරගත්ත පිරිස් අද පොම්පියෝ
The individual who stirred up nationalist groups in the country are nowhere to be seen when Pompeo is due to arrive. Through the SOFA agreement, the government is trying to give US forces a prominent place in the Indian Ocean region. 2 power blocks have been created at present. If we find ourselves caught in the tussle between these 2 blocks, then our country will experience the same situation that occurred during the rule of Jayawardena in the 1980s. The Rajapaksas are trying to push the country amidst this conflict. It is useless if the so-called political patriots only limit their concerns to words. I ask the President or the Prime Minister to publicly declare that they will not sign the MCC agreement. Where are the nationalist forces that emerged in the country? What do they have to say? Are they protesting against this? The arrival of Mike Pompeo in the country is not very important. The important thing is the message that he is bringing with him. He has clearly said that they are arriving here to control the growing influence of China and Russia, and that Sri Lanka must join those efforts. Therefore, does this government have the backbone to clearly say that they are following a non-aligned policy? The Samagi Jana Balavegya does not wish to take sides with any of these entities. We are of the stance that a non-aligned policy must be implemented. We will not shout fake patriotic slogans against the US or China for that reason. However, we will not allow those countries to use Sri Lanka as a scapegoat for their trade war.
ගහන්නෙත් නැහැ. හැබැයි ඒ දෙපැරිස අතර පවතින රාජ්‍යතාන්ත්‍රික වාණිජ්‍ය වෙළඳ යුද්ධයේ දඩබිමක් බවට ශ්‍රී ලංකාව නම් පත් කරන්න අපි ඉඩ දෙන්නේ නැහැ. මේ රටේ ජනතාවට හෙළි කරන්න ඕනේ.
The government said the MCC agreement would be torn and thrown away before the election and then claimed that 70% of it is good after the election. We wish to question the government on its work plan. It must be revealed to the people.
ආණ්ඩුවේ ක්‍රියාමාර්ගය මොකද්ද කියන එක අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී අහන්න ඕනේ.
කාරණා කීපයක් නේ තියෙන්නේ. එකක් තමයි MCC ගිවිසුම සම්බන්ධයෙන්.
There are 2 major concerns. One is Sri Lanka's stance on the MCC and the other is Sri Lanka's alignment with a global superpower. Our government came into power with a stance against the MCC. Our policy statement stressed that we would follow an unaligned foreign policy. We will stand up for this. We believe the government too will take sides with us. If not, let us see what would happen.
අපි නම් පෙනී සිටිනවා එවෙන්නේ. අපි හිතනවා අපේ රජයත් පෙනී ඉඳී කියලා. දැන් අපේ රජේ ඒ සඳහා එකඟ වුණොත් අපි බලමු. ඉතින් අපි කාරුත් එනකොට අපි විරෝධතාවය දක්වන්නේ නැහැ.
We do not protest or oppose anyone's arrival. What is important is the manner in which our leaders deal with the situation. We have never opposed any visits from foreign delegates. However, it is the present leader's responsibility to ensure that his actions will not betray the public's mandate.
මේ ජනවරමට අනුව කටයුතු කරන එක වර්තමාන ජනනායකයන්ගේ වගකීම. ඒ වෙනුවෙන් අපි පෙනී සිටිනවා.
ඇමරිකාව චීනයට විරුද්ධව යුද්ධයක් පටන් ගන්න සූදානම් වෙලා තියෙනවා.
The US is bracing for a war with China. They are trying to set up more than 400 military bases surrounding China by inviting Asian countries to join these efforts of the US. If agreements are signed through this, it will pose a great danger since Sri Lanka will be caught in the midst of the war between US and China. In such an instance, we will become party to this war as well. The Lanka Samasamaja party had decided to hold a protest against this opposite the US embassy. However, curfew has been imposed. Therefore, we don't have the opportunity of protesting opposite the embassy. This began under the Good Governance government. We opposed it at that time as well. We warned about the consequences of these activities during our speeches and protested against it. However, it seems that the US is exerting influence and continuing it under the current government.
දැන් අපිට පේන හැටියට ඒක නවත්තලා නැහැ. ඇමරිකාව මේක ඉදිරියට බලපෑම් ඇති කරලා ගෙනියනවායි කියලා.
Reports indicate that the US is expected to give Sri Lanka a $500 million grant. Is there any truth to that? Talks are being held about that. This shows how successful our foreign policy is. We are maintaining cordial relations with all countries.
On Twitter, the Defense Secretary Mark Esper said, and I quote, "In the Indo-Pacific, the US is strengthening alliances and partnerships by deepening interoperability, expanding deterrent networks, and executing maritime security and awareness operations that reinforce a rule-based international order." End quote. Recently, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, Dean Thompson, said, quote, "From New Delhi, we will travel to Colombo, Sri Lanka, where the Secretary will meet with President Rajapaksa, Prime Minister Rajapaksa, and Foreign Minister Gunawardena to emphasize the US commitment to a strong, independent and democratic Sri Lanka," end quote. He added, quote, "We want to partner with Sri Lanka on our shared goals of sustainable economic development and a free and open Indo-Pacific," end quote. The US State Secretary is expected to arrive in the country tomorrow evening and is expected to engage in bilateral discussions. He will leave for the Maldives on Wednesday and then head towards Indonesia as the final destination of his visit to the Asian region. During his stay in India, talks are expected to revolve around signing the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement between the two sides. It has already been announced that the final phase of discussions surrounding a defense agreement will take place during Pompeo's visit to the Maldives. A decisive round of discussions on defense cooperation will take place in Indonesia as well. However, the matters that are expected to be discussed with Sri Lanka remains unknown so far.
Meanwhile, responding to the recent statement made by U.S. Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Dean Thompson during a press briefing on Secretary Pompeo's upcoming visit, the Chinese embassy in Sri Lanka said the upcoming visit should bring fruits in respect, but not risks or trouble. In a statement, the embassy said, "The people of China and Sri Lanka have a history of friendly exchanges for nearly 2,000 years. We have enough wisdom to handle relations with each other and do not need a third party to dictate." The statement added, "We are firmly opposed to the United States taking the opportunity of the State Secretary's visit to sow and interfere in China-Sri Lanka relations and to coerce and bully Sri Lanka." The statement further read, "We also sincerely advise the United States that true friends should put themselves in the other side's shoes. Currently, Sri Lanka is facing the most severe challenge since the outbreak of COVID-19, and the local health system can no longer bear any imported risks." The United States has sent a large delegation and batches of advance teams into Sri Lanka when its own confirmed cases reached 8.8 million and the death toll surpassed 230,000, and made various requests for the visit and even for an emergent road construction. The embassy questioned if this approach truly proves the US respect to the host country and if it is in the interests of the Sri Lankan people. Meanwhile, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa arrived at the Hunupitiya Gangaramaya temple in Colombo today. The leader of the opposition who visited the Gangarama temple called on the chief incumbent of the temple, Venerable Kirinde Assaji Thera.
We propose to recite the Ratana Sutra in all parts of our country to alleviate the fears and anxieties that have arisen in the country due to this second COVID-19 wave, and to seek strength and courage from the people working in the health and defense lines of this country. We call on the people of the country to implement this in every temple in the country. At this juncture, we should not only work to suppress the second wave, but as citizens of this country, we should work together with unity to block the possibility of such waves emerging in the future.
And that's a wrap of Primetime News for tonight. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Dasnia Thaber, reminding you to stay safe. Good night.